Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin can and string, I'd like to introduce our co-host, analyst, blogger, and all-around swell guy. Please welcome Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing fantastic, and hopefully our listeners can hear it too. We are trying out a couple of new things. I wanted to personally apologize for the audio quality of Norse Code 84 of our last episode. We had a couple of problems happen, and we were kind of on a backup of a backup system, and as a result, it didn't sound all that great. And it ended up just kind of kicking me in the butt to end up getting a new system kind of put in place. So hopefully this sounds good, and people enjoy it. And we're trying to step out of the dark ages, and we finally have the ability to do so. So yay! Thanks, people.
Yay!
Yay.
And a lot of it actually is also my fault. Switching computers and you switch keyboards, and a lot of people were complaining about the keyboard clacking in the last show. I totally understand that. Switched keyboard to my girlfriend's computer because my computer wasn't working. Still kind of isn't. And so I'm doing my best to resolve that. I have a lot of information prepared for every show. So sometimes I move around to get to that information. Sometimes that'll lead to keyboard clacking. I'll try to mute the mic when that happens to prevent that from happening.
You do the chocolate rain thing where you step away from the mic to breathe. Like, is that is that your new thing? Because I kind of support that. That's kind of cool.
No, I think the voice management and breath management is going to be the same, and we're not that professional.
we're not at that level yet. We don't have cough buttons like the voice of the who was the really dirty announcer that was in Major League? I'm trying to think of his name. Anyway, Norm Macdonald had this, and the too fat to fish guy from Howard Stern had this great story about him and a cough button at a preseason game. It's on YouTube. I think he told it on Letterman. It's absolutely hilarious. But it's the guy from that did the voiceovers in Major League, and it's just hilarious. The whole damn movie. Anyway, Bob Uecker is his name. Bob Uecker. So yeah. Anyway, apparently Bob Uecker's hilarious and incredibly dirty, which is good to know for everybody. Also, breaking news! This just into the Norse Code news desk. All of reality is now being officially sponsored by DraftKings.com.
FanDuel is reportedly disappointed because they'll be sponsoring all of Imagination. I think that they'll have the upper hand.
They'll be doing Imagination and the alternate realities. So I think they're getting the better deal on it. I believe the promo code for that is Alt Reality, or it's a promo code, oh, for the love of God, make it stop. All in capital letters.
Yeah, it doesn't work unless you use all capital letters.
Yeah. Dusty and I have this theory that there's no real promo code anymore. They separate it for the commercials, but if you just type anything into there, it'll probably end up giving you like $20 free. Like we were just throwing out names of websites like Farmers Only and stuff, seeing if we could get any sort of reaction out of it.
Farmers Only.
Promo code Black People Meet, promo code 4chan, promo code Reddit, just trying to get something out of it.
Well, actually, I wouldn't be surprised if they were actually very, very diligent about their promo code. So I think what they're doing this year is they're like sort of shotgunning a bunch of media, trying to figure out, what is working for them and what isn't working for them, and they'll track all of the respondents, all the new member signups via the promo codes, and then have a more targeted marketing strategy in the next season based off of the feedback they got off of their promo codes. So there's going to be 8 million promo codes, and then they'll figure out sort of what brought in what, and then redirect the marketing. So that's optimistic ultimately because it means that we'll see less advertising.
And the unlucky saps who it ended up working for are just going to be screwed. They're just going to be seeing and hearing every DraftKings and every FanDuel ad just for the rest of eternity. They're just going to buy up all of the ad space. In years past, it was just Peyton Manning commercials. Peyton Manning. Okay, we get it. Peyton Manning commercial. This year, Nothing but FanDuel and DraftKings. That's DraftKings.com.
Well,
DraftKings.com.
that's what you get for complaining about all those Peyton Manning commercials last year.
And there's been good Peyton Manning commercials too, like the one where he's walking around and he has people on his. He goes up to the butcher and goes, "Cut that meat, cut that meat." Like, that was funny.
Oh, that was pretty good.
But anyway,
you still won't ever beat the laser rocket arm commercial from way back when. That was pretty great.
No, or the fake commercial he did for Saturday Night Live, where he was just pelting kids in the head. Yeah, pelting kids in the head with footballs was absolutely fantastic.
Classic.
Or him telling, "I've never killed a snitch, but I'm not saying I wouldn't." You know what I'm talking about. Just wanted to also bring up, we've increased we've hopefully raised the bar for audio for the show, and we're trying to put out more content, trying to put out 2 episodes a week of Norse Code. If you like what you're hearing, if this is something that you appreciate and everything, we urge you to donate. You can either donate to the link at the bottom of the show page at NorseCodePodcast.com. You can also donate to the Patreon that we have listed both on the website and in the Daily Norseman page as well. So we urge it because as a result of doing 2 shows a week, we do run out of bandwidth and storage much more quicker than we would have anyway. So we are, as a result of running out of space, we're just asking for just a little bit to keep the lights on. We're doing our best to improve the show in several different ways, both in ways that you will hear and ways that you won't necessarily hear. But we're just trying to help out, and we're just trying to make it better for you, the listener. So if you appreciate that, we urge you to please, for the love of all that is good and holy, tree Fitty just like you would the Loch Ness Monster. And perhaps a reef is actually a 30-foot tall creature from the Mesozoic era. You don't know. You don't know.
And keeping that in mind, also, while we aren't a slave to the public so that we'll never become First Take, we always welcome all kinds of feedback. So feedback on the audio quality, that was just, really important for us to sort of tighten up the show. But also feedback on content. We got rid of a lot of features from last year. I don't know if you've even noticed that. But if you have and you want some of those features back, come and tell us. We're adding a couple of new things this year. At the end of every podcast, we've got, daily fantasy advice as well as an update on the Norse Code League. If stuff like that is interesting to you, we can move it up the podcast. We can have more of it. If it's not interesting to you, we're putting it at the end for a reason. But if you really don't want to even have to download that kind of stuff, just let us know. So there's a lot of stuff that we're doing, a lot of stuff that we're not doing that's different from last year. And we really want to know what you have to say about that, because feedback is, really important to how we do this. And it's the whole reason that we have the ability to even ask for donations and things like that, because, the show is designed to be entertaining for the people who are listening. So that's all of you.
Yep. Please give us comments on the Daily Norseman page, or if this is posted on Reddit, or if this is if it's to our Twitter account at NorseCodeDN, or to a Reef's Twitter account, or mine, or Dusty's. Just anybody's. We appreciate hearing from you.
And some of you even contact us by email. We get email every week, so NorseCodePodcast@gmail.com. We'd appreciate hearing back from you.
Yep, absolutely. So now that we are done with all of that, I feel like we have a game to talk about. Not just that, we have a win to talk about. We won against the Lions, which we tend to always do at home, but still, we beat the Lions and we harassed Stafford to no end. There's a great video that was posted on the Minnesota Vikings Reddit page that I am going to put that I'd like you to put in the show notes. That is just the harassment we gave Stafford. We just chased him around and beat him up. Like, that was fun to see. Apparently we can't stop the pass, but we can sure as hell harass Stafford to no end.
Stafford took a beating. I was asking some Lions beat writers about
blood. Blood was drawn.
yeah, quite literally. So Stafford was talking about, he looked down and he saw, blood all over his finger. He's like, there's no way my finger could be bleeding that much. That's ridiculous. And he looked and it was from his elbow, just dripping down. I asked, what that was from, because he ran into the brick wall at TCF. He ran into a literal brick wall, which was, kind of poetic, but also actually it happened. And so I asked a couple of the Lions beat writers, like, where that came from, because I thought I noticed that he was bleeding after he ran into that wall, but, who knows? And they were like, you know what? We have no idea. He took a beating, and we know how much of a beating he took because he had X-rays immediately after the game. Luckily he's fine. The Vikings didn't injure him; they just beat him up, which is kind of sort of the divide that's kind of the side of the line you want to be on. But the Vikings did an incredible job against Matt Stafford. So I think that's kind of the story of the game defensively for the Vikings for a lot of people. But I think something else you want to put out there. Amir Abdullah is a running back I love. He's a running back that a lot of evaluators that I respect, like Matt Waldman, they love him a lot. I think he was Matt Waldman's third running back after Todd Gurley and Melvin Gordon, and the Vikings kept him to 1.5 yards a carry. So it was a phenomenal game all around, and I think the score is probably closer than the game was itself. And we were very cautious in our previews, and I think even the Lions beat writer who predicted the Vikings win was cautious about predicting the Vikings win that we had. I think the Vikings blew everyone's expectations out of the water.
Yep, but let's start first. Let's start with the big story, then that being Adrian Peterson, who did not look very good at all in the first game, and in this one, the run game looked much more improved. He looked like he belonged in the shotgun. He looked like he belonged in his position. His total was 134 yards on 29 carries, 0 touchdowns, and we'll talk about that. And then 58 yards receiving, although that's kind of 58 yards receiving is not exactly accurate because he blew that assignment in order to block that turned into just a little flip to him that he ended up running for 49 yards.
Yeah, it was a 49-yard run. I think that you're right. Adrian Peterson's game overall was it was very sort of up and down, if you will. So there's a lot of high highs and a lot of low lows. And if you take a look at Adrian Peterson's stat line, of course, it looks great. He ran the ball for I think it's 4.6 yards a carry, 1.7 yards after contact. He had a long gain of 25 yards. He broke a tackle. And overall, he had 134 yards on the ground. And like you said, quite a bit of yards in the air. But, there's a lot of caveats to that. I think that if you take a look at, what you would call advanced stats from Pro Football Focus, and, this might be actually one of the last times we'll be able to use Pro Football Focus to talk about this kind of thing because of the way they're changing the architecture. You take a look at some of the advanced stats, and he doesn't look, as good. He gave up that pressure. It was a blown block. I think that overall his pass protection was actually better than we're used to seeing. But that's such a high profile play that was a huge negative that turned into a huge positive. You can't help but see that negative that he blew a block. Overall, his pass protection was not as bad. He didn't protect all that often. I mean, the Vikings have been game planning. Situationally, we saw that in the first game where he only got 10 carries because of the way the situational game plan was running. And so he wasn't asked to protect the passer all that often, but on those snaps that he did protect the passer, I think he was on a snap to snap basis a lot better than I think his reputation was. But you have, that huge, pressure that he gave up that turned into such a big play that allowed us to analyze, potentially all the problems that come with Adrian Peterson pass protecting, that we kind of forget that overall his pass protection wasn't all that bad. Still, a lot of other downs, he quote unquote fumbled the ball 3 times. One of those was called back because of a penalty. Another one was recovered by him. And so there's 1 fumble lost or 2 fumbles in the field of play, and a 50% fumble recovery, which is kind of what you'd expect, generally speaking. And so, that's problematic. And I think I was kind of surprised to see how much anger there was about Adrian Peterson making that mistake in pass protection, giving up those fumbles, even though, he had 134 yards on the ground. He had so many yards in the passing game. And it seems unusual to me because I think that I would take 2 fumbles in the field of play for 178 yards from one skilled player. I think that's a good trade, but I do think that does point to an issue, because when you talk about what it means going forward, you have to think about it like 3 fumbles and not 2 fumbles, because you can't just depend on penalties to call back, those kinds of fumbles. And, in our show notes, we have a question about whether or not Adrian Peterson's carrying the ball a little bit differently. And I think, and I was talking about this with a couple of other people, I think it's a kind of true, but I think a lot of it has to do with sort of the same issues he had in the first game, which is that he's coming back to football. We always talk about all of these positives of Adrian Peterson taking a year off from football without really talking a lot about these negatives. And some of these negatives include some of the stuff that he had to work on over the course of his football career, which include, pass protection, catching the ball, and fumbles. He had those fumble problems from 2007 to 2009, and I have no doubt in my mind that he's going to correct a lot of those problems going forward, just like he did after 2009. He wasn't really a big fumbler after 2009, but he still kind of had that reputation, especially because of the NFC Championship game. I don't think we're going to see as many fumbles from him because I think he's just, I'm not going to say relearning the position, but getting used to some of the position again. So, yeah, it's a very up and down game, but I think you could take those 4.6 yards per carry and kind of be happy with them. He's everyone kind of knows him to be kind of a feast or famine back, and he was doing a little bit more feasting than not. And I think that, even with that, I think that his success rate was actually very, very good in this game. Probably one of the better success rates we'll see from him in general. And if this success rate sustains, probably one of the better success rates in the NFL. So I thought he had overall a net good game, but I think that those issues are something that we have to be aware of.
It's not necessarily that he had a bad game either. It's just a couple of fumbles ended up popping out, and we have high expectations for somebody who is supposed to be that we held out of training camp because he's so important, and it turns out that somebody who hasn't played football in like a year, when he gets hit and he doesn't know necessarily how to protect the football, or like doesn't have that just mental thing just right there. We're supposed to not be, or we're supposed to be surprised that he's having this sort of problem, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah, and this is sort of hindsight-oriented bias. I think that if you had asked us, before the year started, if we think that Adrian Peterson will be uncomfortable running out of the shotgun, and again, Ben Gessling pointed that out in November of 2014, that when Adrian Peterson comes back, he could be a little uncomfortable. So props to him. But if you'd asked us before the year started if he'd be a little bit uncomfortable running out of shotgun, or if he's gonna, if a fumble thing was gonna return. I think we would have probably said that's not something that we're worried about. So this is hindsight-oriented bias, and we do have a test case, when he tore his ACL. But he still had a significant amount of football that he played that year when he tore his ACL, and his recovery was so quick, and that was kind of the story. And so when you kept him out of camp that year, some of it was because he's Adrian Peterson, you tend to keep him out of camp, and some of it was because, he was still sort of at the edge of his recovery from his ACL. It was a little bit different. And, he even started off the year not as good as he had ended that year, and everyone knows how he ended the year. It was a phenomenal year. But I think that he took a literal year off of football, which is a little bit different than all of the other test cases that we had. And so, that's kind of how we can explain it, but it's not something that we would have predicted. Again, it's more the Vikings' job to predict those things, and they probably should have put him in the preseason because, I understand that he's, a valuable asset, and he's such a valuable asset that you kind of want to protect him in the preseason, and he doesn't need that much seasoning, generally speaking. But in this case, he does. You have Teddy Bridgewater, and another valuable asset, maybe not cap-wise, but otherwise he's a huge asset to the Vikings. And they played him in the preseason because it's important that he gets experience. That's why he's playing late in games, so that he continues to get experience. And the amount of risk that you incur from keeping him in the game is much lower than the amount of benefit you get from playing Teddy Bridgewater. And I think that we should have thought of Adrian Peterson as someone who's had a year off of football than someone who's necessarily a plug and play, and the Vikings should have anticipated that. Again, not necessarily something we would have anticipated, so it's understandable. But, they're the decision makers, and of course they have to anticipate these sorts of things. And they didn't. So we're probably going to get a couple more games where maybe we're going to keep asking this question if he's ready yet. But, by the end of the year he will be. It just would have been nice if this valuable asset could show his value in actual games early in the year, because there's only 16 games.
Here's the hot take for you, because you know me, I'm big on the hot takes. Is this the last year that Adrian Peterson sits out the entire preseason?
No, I don't think so. Well, I mean, because like the issue is that he sat out a year of football. If he sits out, if he gets caught beating another child and then he has to sit out the rest of the season, and then he, maybe he does take some preseason carries next year. But I think, barring that, I think that the year of actual football will adequately prepare him a little bit better.
So we just need to keep Adrian away from beating kids, which I think is a positive. I think we should all work toward that, actually.
Yeah, it was already a goal. Now we have an added incentive.
Excellent. So Adrian had his one almost touchdown, and then they ended up going for it on 4th down, and Zach Line, the man, the myth, the legend, the one that everyone knew the ball was going to, ends up scoring the touchdown. And the look on Zach Line's face after when he went to the sidelines after the score was just like, I don't know exactly what happened, but that was really cool.
Yeah, he must have been pretty happy that he got the call. He did get the call in the preseason too. But let's hold back on Zach Line a little bit, because I didn't really notice it in the San Francisco game, maybe because he only had 6 or 7 snaps. But in the Detroit game, I thought that Zach Line actually had a bad game, and I think that the ability to run a touchdown from short, that's replicable. I mean, you have Matt Asiata and Adrian Peterson on the roster, and they can both do that. And so I don't think he added a bunch of value, but he did lose a bunch of value, I think, by being a poor run blocker. I think that he had some issues in run blocking. And early in the game, he was actually okay, but I think as the game went on, he continued to degrade as a run blocker. So my concerns about him as a blocker are still there. That touchdown that he ran is good, but I don't think necessarily value added. Maybe the Vikings just aren't really going to roll with a fullback all that often anymore.
Probably not indicative of the play that we should expect from Zach Line in the future.
Yeah, and I think we're probably just not going to see that many snaps with him on the field, just because I think he's a liability in run blocking.
Well, Zach Line did at least add 1 yard to the total that we had, which was 199 yards. And I feel like this is important because the San Francisco game, the total amount of runs we had for yardage was 71. 71 to 199.
Oh, wow.
That's in my mind, that's a big statement, because that shows that we were able to run. We were able to consistently run. And when we look at the yards that Teddy Bridgewater ended up passing for, which is only 151, it showed that we didn't need to, because we were constantly in the lead.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting that they got 199 and not 200, but I think that's a good indication of the Vikings be able to play the kind of game that they want to play. Again, Adrian Peterson, not necessarily the most consistent back in the world, but he was consistent in this game, which is a good thing, obviously. Teddy Bridgewater also added some yards on the ground, and I thought that his runs were generally pretty good. I bet if you got rid of his QB Neal, he's at 200, or the Vikings are at 200 or 201 yards. So, screw kneeling. But overall, I thought everybody had a pretty decent day. Jerick McKinnon, of course, he only got 6 yards in 3 attempts, but I think all of them were after contact. He forced a missed tackle, so I think that when you take into account maybe the run blocking that he had, he actually did also have a good day. Matt Asiata had a run. He had 2 runs, actually, and so he averaged 4 yards a carry. So I think overall the Vikings were pretty happy with what they had. They had that Jarius Wright, reverse, which was pretty well designed. It was pretty cool. Overall, I think the Vikings were very, very happy with the production they had on the ground, which I think translated a little bit into the overall offensive production.
That reverse was just real nice. I haven't seen a good reverse by the Vikings in what seems like a really long time. Like, whenever they break out the reverse, especially with Patterson, you would just sit there and go, oh God, yep, here come, yep, 7 yards behind the line. God damn it.
Yeah, I think it's been a while since we've seen a good effective reverse, and I think part of that is because it's such a slow developing play. It's kind of a gadget play that when you throw a player like Patterson out there, defenses are expecting it when he's not lined up out wide. They expect him to run up the middle when he's lined up in the backfield. When he's lined up out wide, I think they expect him to do either an end around or a reverse. Defenses catch it. And for a slow developing play, when you have those kinds of plays that take a while to get to the line of scrimmage, and defenses have the ability to anticipate what's happening, they're not going to bite on the fakes. and they're not going to bite on some of the other tricks, and so they're going to flow to the ball a lot better, and that causes problems. But with Jerry is right. I mean, we know that he can run routes. We know that he is a deep threat. We know that he can attack basically anywhere on the field. And because of that, it was easy for the Vikings to take advantage of what they had, especially because the reverse, it's a reverse because Adrian Peterson started with the ball. It started with Adrian Peterson getting the ball, which no one really expected him to give up the ball, and so that in particular did help. But yeah, I think if Patterson, when he's on the field, were more of in every kind of down and every kind of passing situation weapon, he'd be more effective. But he's not, and Jarius Wright is, and so it's been a while, and it was refreshing to see.
Yep, I totally agree. Anything to add on Bridgewater? I mean, this wasn't necessarily some highlight reel game that we'll be showing our grandkids or anything for him, but he definitely managed the game.
Well, there were certainly some highlights in the game.
I mean, there were definitely some
49-yard, the 49-yard, shovel to Peterson. I thought was
that was
phenomenal.
During a weird period of time where it was like every other pass was a shovel. Like it was just so weird because Stafford kept doing it and Bridgewater kept doing it too. Like, I don't know if they're just trying to one up each other right now or what, but I think Adrian stopped all that with the 49-yard run after the catch.
He won the game of shovels, that's for sure.
Yeah, he has the iron shovel at the end of that.
But yeah, no, I think Teddy Bridgewater adapted really well to the pressure that he saw. I think the key in this game was that he made decisions a lot quicker than he did in the San Francisco game. I mean, he responded to pressure better, of course. There was less pressure, which is, I think, a credit to the offensive line. And in particular, there was less interior pressure, which is really nice to see. And because of that, the Vikings were more productive and more consistent and created more successes. But then also, aside from that, the Vikings were also able to, produce when there was pressure because Teddy Bridgewater was a little bit more calm and collected. And, my issue with him in the preseason, my issue with him in the San Francisco game was his consistent inability to move the chains because of his, proclivity to choosing sort of a safer underneath route instead of a more effective and wholly successful deeper route, maybe like on third down. And so I thought in this game, Teddy Bridgewater did a very good job of that. I think if you take that highlight away, which I think it was a phenomenal credit to him because it showed a lot of awareness of how, the offense was set up, and it showed a lot of awareness of how much time he had, and it was an incredible play while he was getting hit. I think if you take that away, he also had some pretty good throws. There was a good number of sideline throws, a good number of throws to get away from pressure that produced first downs, and so. I think that you're right that it didn't produce, maybe the kinds of, Ben Roethlisberger against I think it was the Colts where he scored like 8 touchdowns or something like that. I don't think it was, quite that kind of game, but I think that it was a consistently effective and efficient game from Teddy Bridgewater, which isn't, when a lot of people say that a quarterback is efficient, they're usually damning with faint praise because they're saying, the quarterback isn't, the best we can say is that he doesn't make mistakes, which is not really what the case was here because Teddy consistently moved the ball down the field, and then when the ball was moved down the field, the Vikings were able to complete it, either with a touchdown pass from Teddy to Rudolph, a touchdown run from Teddy, or a touchdown run to Zach Line.
I was talking to somebody after the fact, and we were mentioning the San Francisco game and how indecisive Teddy Bridgewater looked, and I had said something along the lines of, it looked like Teddy was your significant other at a restaurant where you have to order something from the board, and they have all the time in the world to sit and wait, but they just couldn't make up their mind, and it was getting infuriating. Like, that's how it felt with the 49ers game, because it felt like he walked in and knew what he wanted, but couldn't pull the trigger. And ended up second-guessing himself, ended up throwing into a place that he really should not have been doing.
Yeah, no, I think I think some of it was that, but I think some of it was also just like taking too long to confirm what he saw, which is kind of related, to what you were saying because he was like second-guessing himself. I think it's just part of being a second-year quarterback in your first game back. It's just when he saw something, he waited too long. And then, when you wait too long and confirm that a receiver's open, suddenly it closes up because that's kind of how speed works in the NFL. And then he has to move to a second read, and then he waits to confirm, and then he gets sacked, right? And that didn't really happen here. I think Teddy trusted his instincts a little bit more, which, that's a difficult phrase because he has competing instincts. One of his instincts is telling him this receiver's probably open, and another of his instincts is probably telling him, well, we don't actually know that. Don't throw the ball. Holy crap, you could make a mistake. And he quieted that second instinct in order to make the first instinct. And of course, we're kind of speculating based on what we saw. We don't know what was actually in his head, but that's, I think, probably a decent interpretation of what we saw, where he was significantly more decisive in this game. And, importantly, he made those quick decisions, like whether or not, his decision was correct or not. And, more often than not, it was, because that's, how good of a quarterback he is. He was able to pull the trigger.
Yep. And the offensive line held. Offensive line held Detroit to 1 hit and 1 sack. It looked a little more, I want to say it looked like they were getting to Teddy more often than that, like they were making a run for it. But Teddy was able to keep the ball away from it and keep the ball from hitting the ground too.
Yeah, for sure. I think he only had like something like 4 incompletions on like 19 dropbacks. One of them was a sack.
Yeah.
And I think he did a very good job of preventing pressure from being converted into hits and preventing hits from being converted into sacks. There's the 1 sack, and that was kind of the only success the defensive line had against Teddy Bridgewater all day, because you can't really count the pressure that they put on him as success, because he performed so well under pressure that it's not even that. So. Yeah, and I think the offensive line, did a pretty good job. I still think, I probably sound like a broken record because, I think a lot of people think that, there are these players that I hate and I look for them to do poorly, and then when they do poorly, I pounce on them.
Cough, Chad Greenway, cough.
We only had 16 snaps. So
we'll get to Greenway, yeah.
Yeah, we'll get to the defense in a second, but I do think that T.J. Clemmings was an issue in this game, both in pass protection and in run blocking, and I think for him, he had actually somewhat easier assignments in run blocking, and he didn't complete them. It was kind of easier for the Vikings to move and run on the left side of the line than on the right side of the line. But I think Matt Khalil, who didn't have as good of a game as he did against San Francisco, because I think he had 2 penalties. I think that's part of it, and I think that he gave up. Yeah, I think he probably gave up a pressure or something along those lines. I think Matt Khalil's game wasn't as good, but I think it's indicative of the kind of left tackle that you want him to be, because I think that he made fewer mistakes than he did last year on a per snap basis, and I think that he generally held up well from a technique perspective, which is kind of what you want going forward. I think that Brandon Fusco did much better in this game than he did last game, which is important, and I think that Joe Berger did a fine job, although the blitzes weren't as, I don't want to say exotic because I don't really know what that means, but they weren't as well designed, and there weren't that many blitzes, so there was less for him to do. But I think that he did a fine job, and I think that Mike Harris did pretty spectacularly as well. So I think the offensive line should be pretty happy with what they did. I think part of it also is that the Vikings got rid of the ball really, really quickly, and I think that's a big difference between these two games. I think that when you look at week 1 time in the pocket, Teddy Bridgewater, I think Ben Gessling also tweeted this out. He said something about had Teddy Bridgewater spent more than 50% of his snaps waiting 3 seconds or longer to throw the ball. Pro Football Focus has him at 66% of his snaps at 2.6 seconds or longer, so that consistently matches up. And that was week 1, but in week 2. You take a look at Pro Football Focus, and Teddy Bridgewater's kind of in the middle of the field when it comes to time spent in the pocket. He didn't spend nearly as much time on average in the pocket. If you look at it on a per attempt basis, the amount of time it took for him to get to a passing attempt was about 2.37 seconds is what they have, 2.4 seconds in general, which is the middle of the pack. So getting rid of the ball a lot quicker helped them a lot too. So I don't want to say it's all the offensive line. I think they did a good job. Their assignment was also much, much easier this game because Teddy got rid of the ball really, really quickly.
Yep, and the defense. Oh man, the defense. We kicked some serious butt on the defense for run. 38 total rushing yards for Detroit, and that includes 20 for Matt Stafford. We shut them down.
Yeah, no, it was an abysmal game, I think, for the Detroit running offense. They tried Amir Abdullah for a while, and he's their best back. And like I said earlier in the show, you only got 1.5 yards carry. Joyke Bell got 0.5 yards carry. Theo Riddick had 1 run for 5 yards. I guess that's like sort of a black mark for the defense, but I think they're fine because Matt Stafford if he's their leading rusher and he was only able to get 20 yards, that's obviously a huge problem for the Detroit Lions offense and a huge boost to the way the Minnesota Vikings defense was run. And I think a lot of it's up front. I think you could credit Linval Joseph, I think, who had an amazing game. He didn't just put pressure on Matt Stafford, and he did do a lot of that. He was able to redirect a lot of those runs. He probably had the best run defense of any Viking in the game. He was able to not just clog up the lane, but present enough of a threat to the running back that the running back had to redirect where he was going. Trey Floyd was able to clean up, some of that too by doing something very similar. I don't think he got in the stat box all that much. I think he got, maybe an assisted tackle or something along those lines. But his impact in the game was very similar to Linval Joseph's, where he didn't close down on the running back, but he forced them to redirect. And the people playing cleanup, Harrison Smith, Brian Robinson, Everson Griffin, were able to do something to that effect. If you get rid of Everson Griffin's, penalties that get 2, I would say that he probably had a pretty good game. But overall, I think if you include those penalties, that he was a little bit problematic. But Brian Robinson, people have been criticizing him for a couple of years now because he doesn't produce as much, and a lot of that has to do with the way his assignments are doled out. He plays a lot more contained, especially in the Mike Zimmer defense. He was able to do a very good job of flushing Matt Stafford into other players, and then also because he was incredible, I think, in his pass rush. And some of that has to do with the assignments that the Detroit offensive line was. I think their right tackle had some problems, but I think you don't want to take much away from Brian Robinson, who had a very good game. And then in run defense, of course, he was able to clean up. He had something like 3 or 4 tackles for loss. He was
Robinson really turned it on. He had like 3 or 4 plays where it was just him. It was great to see. It's like, oh hey, Robinson decided to show up for this one.
Yeah, and he had 2 batted passes too, which we were talking about it at the beginning of last season about sort of the hidden value that Robinson brings, and he actually, for 4-3 defensive ends, he actually led the league in batted passes over the course of his career. Batted passes per pass rush attempt. Led the league or was second or third. So he was at the top, and we were expecting to see that last year. We didn't see it. We saw 2 batted passes in this game, which some of that, Stafford is kind of like Haskell in that his throwing angles are off sometimes, and that leads to batted passes. But it's always good for a player like Brian Robinson to take advantage of that and turn that into incompletions.
So the run defense was there. The pass defense still needed a little bit of work. And if it felt like Stafford was completing all of his passes, he didn't. He threw 53 times and only completed 32, but he still completed 32 passes.
And it was a nearly 80% completion rate. It was actually 78% completion. Yeah. But some of that has to do with some of it's a little bit of his luck. I think there was maybe 1 dropped pass from the Lions in the entire game, and that was funny enough. That was actually Calvin Johnson.
I was gonna say that was the Calvin Johnson drop that everybody in the stadium just like turned their head. Just really.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That's like the sighting of 2 unicorns at the same time in the same place. Like that's really.
Yeah, he was wide ass open, and he just dropped it. But I think that part of it has to do, part of the success the Vikings defense had in general has to do with the way that Stafford completed his passes, which they weren't for very many first downs, they weren't for very many successes, and when he was under pressure, he was liable to throw some pretty plays that are liabilities, I think, for the Vikings or for the Detroit Lions offense. His yards per attempt while under pressure was only 3.9, which is kind of what you expect, and he had the vast majority of his attempts under pressure, something like 20, or not vast majority, but a number of his attempts under pressure, something like 21, and he completed very few of those. Of those that he did complete, when he was able to complete his passes, and I did the math wrong, he had 60% completion. They weren't for very far. So I think the Vikings forced a lot of underneath throws, and they were happy taking those short completions. And because of that, the Vikings can be pretty proud of what they put together. I think that you could take a look at Captain Munnerlin's game. I thought, a lot of people were willing to tar and feather him, after last season, I think probably fairly. I think that in this game he kind of proved why he was such a valuable acquisition in the slot for them. He allowed very, very few yards after the catch, and he allowed very, very few, catches for deep. I think there's that one Golden Tate, 18-yarder, and then everything after that It was like a 10-yard completion, a 5-yard completion, a 7-yard completion, a 3-yard completion. These are the kind of completions that you can be kind of okay with. And then he also forced a number of incompletions, and he generally had pretty good coverage. I mean, the Lions were trying to stay away from Calvin Johnson for whatever reason. I mean, he was thrown at 13 times, but I think that for the most part, they were trying to stay away from Calvin Johnson on those deep throws, and they wanted those underneath stuff, because they think that a player like Xavier Rhodes or Captain Munderland can't really contest those, and they didn't, they weren't able to do much. Xavier Rhodes and Calvin Johnson, I think last year we would have been anticipatory, but this year we're kind of happy that happened, and I think that in Xavier Rhodes' rookie year we would have been a little bit worried, but I think. I mean, you take a look. I mean, Calvin Johnson, when he caught the ball, it was under 5 yards a catch. Not even just 5 yards an attempt, but 5 yards a catch. And 18 of those yards were on one play. So I think that you can be pretty proud of what the Vikings secondary put together, even though Matt Stafford completed a fair bit of his passes, because it wasn't for very many yards per attempt. It weren't for very many successes. And I think that every one of the players in the secondary did a good job. Now, the linebackers, I thought, were a bit more problematic in pass coverage. I mean, Eric Kendricks, I was really looking forward to how he would do in pass coverage. When he was on the field, I don't think he did a very good job defending the pass. He was like a step out of it. I think Gerald Hodges didn't do a very good job when he was in coverage. And I think that Anthony Barr, I thought he did like maybe okay, but he still allowed a couple of completions. So the linebackers in coverage weren't as good, but the secondary more than I think made up for that by shutting down the primary weapons that the Detroit Lions have. Forcing smaller completions, right. I should say.
But let's talk about some of the linebacker play. The big news out of after the game was the sheer number of snaps that certain players had taken, and Ted Glover, I believe, had mentioned on the Daily Norseman, had posed the question: Is this now time to start phasing out Chad Greenway, or has it already happened? Because he ended up taking a significantly less number of snaps than he had in the previous game and in years past. It didn't make sense unless he was injured. Are they keeping him out because he was a liability in the 49er game?
I actually, as much as I would like to say yes, because I think that would mean that the Vikings coaching staff and I are kind of on the same page, I actually don't think that's what happened. I think a lot of it has to do with the alignments they were seeing and the personnel packages that they were getting. The Vikings played a lot of nickel, and they played a lot of 3-3-5, which is basically a nickel. And it wasn't a 3-3-5 stack, which is kind of what a lot of people are used to seeing when they see 3 linemen and 3 linebackers, because the linebackers weren't stacked over the defensive linemen. They were covering their own bubbles. And then you have to walk the safety down to cover the run. And I think that, the Vikings, they saw a lot of 3 receiver sets from the Lions, and so you take Chad out and you put a defensive back in. Or they were saying, Eric Ebron split out. And Eric Ebron, he's much more of a receiving tight end than a run blocking tight end, and so you can be comfortable getting rid of your run defense linebacker to put in a pass defense linebacker against this kind of tight end. And so when you saw that, I think that you were less likely to see Chad Green or more likely to see a player like Eric Kendricks. I think it was much more of a personnel thing, and I think it was kind of, based off of what the Vikings saw, which is kind of what Mike Zimmer said after the game. There is something to bring up, though, which is that after the game was over, a lot of people talked to Chad Greenway and asked about his number of snaps, and, he said that he was, preparing for it, and he was gearing down and stuff like that. And so some of it, I think some of it can be attributed to a phase out, but I think we're probably going to see more snaps from him in the near future. But I think, eventually Eric Kendricks is going to replace him at the will linebacker position, and we're going to see more snaps from Eric Kendricks and fewer snaps from Chad Greenway overall. But I think that's less about how much of the liability the Vikings think Greenway is and more about the matchups that they think that they can get. And you're going to see Chad phase out for Eric Kendricks just because they want to give Kendricks the experience and because, his athleticism is really useful. So I think, I wouldn't have brought him back, of course, because I think, Greenway is a liability on the field. But I think that the Vikings don't really agree with that assessment, and I think his snap count is more reflective of what they saw and the long-term development plans than they have than their opinion of Chad Greenway.
Greenway is just going to fill in for Ragnar for the rest of the year. It'll be okay.
He's a little bit more expensive than Ragnar, but I guess not as much as some people think.
Yeah, but we'll talk about that in just a little bit. God, this was just such a heavily penalized game. It was a little difficult to watch after a little bit because it was just our defense kept holding, or pass interference. It wasn't necessarily pass interference, but it seemed like the refs had a lot more to do overall with all of the games actually on Sunday than in weeks past. This was just a really heavily penalized game, and I forget if it was a Monday night game or if this was a Sunday game a year or two back when the announcers just kept talking about the discipline that the Detroit Lions are bringing to football and all the discipline. There was no discipline at all. This was a very undisciplined squad. There was holding, there was jumping, there was all sorts of stuff. There was even a fourth down play that probably shouldn't have happened.
My God, that was nuts.
No, correct me if I'm wrong, because I had posted this on Twitter. I didn't understand how the fourth down play how the ball ended up going back up to Stafford. Like, I didn't get it, because the line judge is the guy at the line, right? He's the guy in front of the orange stripe on the side, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so the line judge walks over to the spot of where the ball came out, or where the ball ended up, and walks back over to the stripe, which is in front of the down marker. It's very clear that he's short, and it's
well. So from what I remember, what ends up happening is that he drops the ball.
Right.
Like, literally, he drops the ball and the ball rolls out, and either the umpire or the referee, I think it was the umpire, picks up the ball because he turned around.
Yeah.
And he didn't see the fact that the guy had dropped the ball. He just saw the ball rolling, and so he thought that the guy had ruled it was a first down, and that because the Lions were in kind of a tempo situation, he rushed to set the ball again, and the Lions snapped the ball. And then once the ball snaps, there's nothing you can do about it. So I think it was a communication issue from the referees. But honestly, the line judge should have asserted some authority.
The line judge should have tackled him and been like, "Listen, I'm before the line. It was fourth down. Like, you can the refs are allowed at least a little bit of leeway in that kind of situation, especially since if you looked at the clock, they had Andy Reid's sort of clock management and didn't realize the 2-minute warning was just about to happen." Like,
yeah.
they didn't get it. So watching that happen, the only way it worked in my head is if the ump who was just running up with the ball didn't see what was going on and just wanted to run up because he knew that they were in hurry up, or B, that the ump and the line judge didn't know it was fourth down. Like, that's the only way that play works in my head. Otherwise, it looks really, really shady.
Well, I think it's less shady and more just buffoonery.
There you go.
I think that when he saw the ball on the ground, I think that he thought that the line judge had ruled that it was a first down, because otherwise, otherwise he holds onto the ball and gives it, I think, to the head ref, because it's a change of downs, and so you have to change the ball because, again, as we all remember from the Patriots controversy, each offense has its own set of footballs prepared for the game, and so that ball can't go back to the Vikings. And so if that ball is out of his hands, then it's the Lions' ball, and so the ref is running back. And I think that when he saw the ball on the ground, I think that he thought that the ref had tried to give him the line judge tried to give him the ball back. And so I think that's what happened. And then, of course, the ball boys that have the first down markers and the sticks, they hadn't moved yet. And so the Lions snapped the ball, because any football team should do that in that situation. Like, I have no issue with the Lions, trying to get away from having that spot reviewed. So they snapped the ball right away before the down markers had been set. And that's actually a second point of failure for the refs, because the refs need to stop the snap from happening if the entire officiating crew, and that includes the ball boys that have the down markers, if the entire officiating crew is not set, you can't snap the ball. But they snapped the ball, and no one blew a whistle when they absolutely should have, so that's a second failure point. And they threw it, and it was incomplete, and it was a good incompletion. because the Lions were able to secure the next 2 or 3 downs, even though they hadn't earned it basically. And so, yeah, I think, and the Vikings were confused, but I guess Mike Zimmer probably could have called a timeout or something. Challenged the spot, I guess. It's hard to blame Mike Zimmer.
I believe we were actually out of timeouts at that point. Like we were out of challenges, and because we had no timeouts left.
Challenge.
Yeah, because that was the one thing I was looking at the screen like, wait a second, why can't we? Oh, we can't do anything because we are out of timeouts, and we already challenged. Though we had 2 challenges like in a row.
Oh, right. Well, we got one back because we won the first challenge, so we did technically have a challenge remaining, but you can't use it if you don't have a timeout.
Right.
So yeah, you can't even blame Mike Zimmer. That's kind of nuts.
Yeah. But you know who we can blame? We can blame Blair Walsh for missing another extra point.
Yeah, and I think nobody has him in the league, right?
Nobody. So, we're all smart enough to stay away from Blair Walsh in our league. It doesn't mean that somebody wasn't struck this week with a missed kicker, with a missed extra point. Yeah, but the point of the story is that Blair Walsh is still missing extra points.
Yeah, and it was kind of
at home.
Well, not kind of. It's wholly frustrating because he hasn't gone a game without missing a kick yet. He even did it in the preseason where there were like a bunch of missed kicks, and it's frustrating because it's not even that he's replicating his kind of disappointing performance from last year. It's that he's doing much worse than that. And I guess he has the case of the yips. I don't think the Vikings are going to bring in a kicker until maybe halfway through the season, if they are at all going to bring in a kicker. And they're probably not going to bring in true competition until the end of the season, because I think you're probably going to see sort of a Mason Crosby type situation. We keep referencing that because I think that's the only analog that we have to that. But you have to remember, there are other situations where rookie kickers have done phenomenally their rookie season and then flame out. I think you can take a look at like Kai Forbath or Billy Cundiff or players like that who had really good rookie seasons and then just did not continue for whatever reason. And unfortunately, it kind of looks like Blair Walsh might be headed down that direction unless he corrects something. I think, Mike Prefer mentioned in the preseason that Blair Walsh was like rushing his kicks. Hopefully that's been corrected, or that, he's working on his way to correcting that. But there's a lot of issues at play here. And kicking, it's a confidence game, and I don't mean that from like a con men perspective, but like from the you need to have confidence, and he may not have that. And who knows when he's going to have that, and who knows how the best way to coach someone who has confidence issues is, because if you've got confidence issues, if you bring in competition, maybe that could degrade it, maybe that can make it worse. It's kind of a delicate situation, and figuring out kicker headspace is like not probably an enviable job for a coach.
Maybe he just needs to sit and watch the Shia LaBeouf. You can do it motivational tape like 6 or 7 times before he goes out. Like, maybe that's just what he needs. They have Surface tablets on the sidelines.
You can have tablets, yeah. You can have, remember, they're not iPads.
No, they are not iPads, no matter how many times Al Michaels says that they are iPads. They are not iPads. They are Surfaces.
Yeah, I love that Microsoft had to train the announcers on saying the right thing. But yeah, you've got Surface tablets. Load your motivational Shia LaBeouf video, and
I feel like we could all use. I feel like we could all use a motivational Shia LaBeouf video. It's almost
put it in the comments.
It's almost like a montage. Even Rocky had a montage.
Even Rocky had a montage. Yeah, I think the only downside to this plan is if Blair Walsh gets iced. Now he no longer has the Shia LaBeouf video in his recent memory. He has to load it in his head, or he has to go to the sideline while the timeout's happening, watch it again.
Is Google Glass illegal on the field of play? I feel like we might
assuredly.
I feel like we might be able to get away with it if he had Google Glass out there. That's too bad. So, by now, if you are a Minnesota Vikings fan, I'm willing to bet that you have some sort of an opinion or have heard about the Ragnar issue. Ragnar, the Vikings mascot for the last, how many years has it been? It's been a long time.
21. It's 21 years. Yeah, he started in 1994.
Yeah. Started in 1994. Ragnar is sitting out. He's holding out, much like Cam Chancellor. Except he is asking for significantly less money than Cam Chancellor, but more money than you would expect a person dancing on the sidelines to be asking for. He's asking for, I believe it's 20,000 per game now, which is up considerably. And I don't even know.
It's all kind of confusing because of the way that it's being reported. We know for a fact that Ragnar hasn't talked to anyone. Joe Duranich, I think is his name. He hasn't talked to anyone about this. A bunch of reporters have tried talking to him, and they haven't been able to talk to him. So all of the information we're getting about Ragnar and his contract demands, they all come from the team. And of course, the team is going to, phrase it how they think is best. I think he's asking for a yearly amount, and that yearly amount is $160,000. In that yearly amount are all of the responsibilities that come with being a mascot. And we know that in the last 5 years, he hasn't done community events for the Vikings, according to the Vikings. But we don't know whether or not he's been used in promotional materials. He probably has been used in promotional materials. He was on the website, a bunch of times. His likeness is being used to promote the team, regardless of whether or not he shows up to community events. And we don't know, how the Vikings define a community event, because a community event could just be, doing community service, like, packing up toys for tots or doing a Thanksgiving, feed the hungry kind of thing, but might not include promotional events with advertisers where he might be involved in helping promote a product. We don't know how the Vikings are defining that thing. And so it doesn't just include, showing up to games, and the Vikings have the ability to shape the language, because Ragnar's not talking, to shape the language about this discussion. So if he's asking for $160,000 a year, then the Vikings can say, oh, he's asking for $20,000 a game. Doesn't that sound extortionary? That's incredible. And, for context, it is important to point out that he did only get $1,500 a game before this. And that sounds like an enormous price increase. But there's a couple of things that we have to keep in mind. And I think the first is, A, I don't give a shit how much Ragnar makes. More power to him. B, I don't really care how much fans care how much he makes. But if we want to have like a more nuanced discussion, I'm willing to bring some more information to the table. And C, what his responsibilities are and what industry standard is, and sort of like everything that's involved with being a mascot. Being a mascot is, and I know two people actually who were Goldie the Gopher. And it's like a very insular community. It's a very competitive market because, well, it's a competitive market. I mean, just not a lot of people have a history of being a mascot on their resume, and it turns out you actually just can't you can't do that. You can't just apply to be a mascot. There's a lot that goes into it. I don't know all of those things, but the community is the forums are all private. You can go to like these forums if you have some way to access it, or someone invites you, another mascot, I guess, invites you to these forums, and they have these discussions. They're very strong opinions about what it means to be a mascot, and a lot of it has to do with when you're in costume, you have to be a mascot at all times, which means that Ragnar cannot more than like a regular person get caught urinating in public or do anything, criminal or whatever, which, it sounds like you're not asking a lot, but you're asking someone to be basically on duty and kind of in character and be a public face of the team 24/7. Like, you can't make a single public mistake, and he hasn't for the past 21 years. I think another thing that we need to think about is industry standard. I know at least two mascots in the NFL make at least $160,000 a year. So he's not actually asking for anything that's beyond what other mascots make. That's industry standard what he's asking for. Now, maybe he's doing a little bit less because the Vikings said he hasn't done a community event in the past 5 years. But maybe in this new contract that he's signing with the Vikings, either, the Vikings aren't going to ask him to do it, or he's already agreed to do it. Also, they use his likeness. His likeness brings in money for the Vikings. I mean, they wouldn't use it if it didn't have a use otherwise. And he does things to promote, things for the Vikings and things for Vikings advertisers, which means that he adds value. People complained about him not being at games, which means that he's part of the fan experience, so he adds value. So things, whether or not his job is difficult is also a separate question from how much value he adds. Then I would also argue we don't have no idea how difficult his job is, because he takes abuse from fans all the time. I mean, it's kind of the job of a mascot to be kind of like, to attract a bunch of attention, positive and negative, sometimes drunk, from fans. And I think that we don't really think about it. We just think about him riding in on a motorcycle. And like, hey, yeah, I can do that. I mean, I can't, but a lot of people can ride motorcycles, and so they can. And you think about that, and you don't really think about all of the other things that go into being a mascot. And also, when he had signed his initial contract, maybe it's another 10-year contract because he's asking for a 10-year contract now. Maybe his previous 10-year contract, at the time, $1,500 was industry standard for a mascot. But things changed. The NFL has grown enormously in terms of revenue since 1994, since 2004. And because of that, things like mascot pay is, risen, maybe even more than player pay. And the only good point I think I've seen about this, about someone who's complained about his pay, which again, I don't give a shit, is from Judd Zolgat's Hoodie, who's back on Twitter, by the way. So if you missed out, he's back. He mentioned that, wouldn't the cheerleaders be pissed at seeing how much Ragnar makes? I think that's true, but I think that's more just because cheerleaders are underpaid and not because Ragnar is necessarily overpaid.
And we went through a whole summer of, or a whole winter and summer of dealing with that sort of thing. Like there have been a lot of groups that have been complaining about the amount that the cheerleaders have been making and how minuscule it is.
Yeah, and I think that's a much bigger problem than by itself. I think that has nothing to do with Ragnar, and I think that if Ragnar gets paid $18,000 a game, $20,000 a game, $10,000 a game, whatever, I think that all that does is provide ammunition for the cheerleaders. But I don't think it's an evidence that Ragnar is asking for too much. I think it's evidence that the NFL and the Vikings are one of them don't pay their cheerleaders enough. Because I mean, if you want to talk about use of promotional material and use of likenesses, of course, you see the cheerleaders everywhere. I don't know if they work as often as Ragnar does, but I wouldn't be surprised if they work more because they have to put in practice for the routines. They probably show up to more community events, and I mean they definitely show up to more community events. They probably show up to more promotional events than Ragnar does. But whether or not individual cheerleader shows up to more, I don't know. But I mean they do a lot of work, and it's probably more demanding, and it's probably scarcer work than in terms of the level of skill that they can provide. Than Ragnar provides, but I think again that's just evidence that cheerleader pay is already too low. I think that's independent.
Yeah, it was fun for me last year. One of my favorite game experiences of all time happened last year when I went out to the Falcons game. I ended up getting tickets for like the third row in one of the corner areas on the lower level, and there was a guy sitting just like 2 or 3 seats down that was, and I mentioned it on the show too. There was a guy sitting next to us that had a full Falcons outfit on. Like he had the jersey, he had the shorts, he had big red socks, shoes, had a helmet on, and had the gloves on. And I know I sent the picture to you and Dusty, and the two of you just went, wow. But
Yep.
Ragnar before the game was walking around. And he saw him in the crowd, and the amount of crap he gave him was just because the fans around us, okay, whatever, that's funny. And a couple of the more drunk people were really getting on him, but it wasn't until Ragnar came by and just started railing on him. And
I don't remember this part of the story. That's great.
We were laughing so hard at that, and for about the rest of the game, whenever the Falcons did anything, it was fine. But whenever Ragnar came by, he would make a special attempt to find the guy, and remind him what the score was. He came right over after the Harrison Smith interception too to end the game, just to make sure that the guy was still around to see it, because it happened right in front of us.
That's amazing.
That and Ragnar dancing to the to whatever the cheerleaders were dancing to. I miss him, and while. I think Eric Thompson had said something about how he'll take this distraction over any other Vikings distraction or thing that's happened in the past 20 years. We will take Ragnargazi and we will go with it. We will move on with it. And as you had said, the only information is coming directly from the Vikings. He's not saying anything about his contract or anything. So I was actually questioning the numbers that were coming out and whether or not they were valid. because he hasn't said anything about it. He just
we don't even know how much he's willing to quote unquote bend, right? Like,
yeah.
And one thing I want to point out is Michael Rand, he's the kind of writer that's perfect for this kind of story. He did mention that the Vikings are considering potentially moving on from having Ragnar as a mascot or toning down his involvement, which I think is related to this contract issue, because it may not be just a money numbers game. It might be because of toning down, because you have a new stadium coming up and you've got a way to rebrand the Vikings. I mean, Victor the Viking was branded like 2-3 years ago or something like that, and so there's a lot of things that are at play here. And I think that even if he's asking for industry standard, or if he's willing to go down to 15,000, maybe that's less relevant than maybe the length of his contract, or what he sees his spot on the team as versus what they see their spot on the team as, that sort of thing.
I think it's just time to. I think he's played backup for long enough. I think it's time we break out Sid Davey. It's time to break out 100% cheese free and just put him in a place of prominence. He certainly works out hard enough. I feel like he's trained long enough for this day.
Yeah, he's been sitting out on the bench for all these years, just waiting, buying season tickets every single season.
And he's Canadian. He's Canadian too. Like he works on the railroad. Like he makes the trip. He's
a Winnipeg engineer. Yeah, and he can obviously hoist the cheerleaders if push comes to shove and he needs to do that. I mean, he was able to carry Randy Moss. So
he even went to New England. Right, he even went to New England to pick up Randy Moss.
I mean, that's dedicated. That was one of the best stories.
That was great.
That year. That was incredible.
All right. So enough on Ragnargazi. Even though I love the term Ragnargazi and I relish any ability or any time to say Ragnargazi. Ragnargazi. All right.
Ragnargazi.
I just wanted to say it one more time. It's right up there with Babatunde. So, last thing we want to talk about, daily fantasy. We want to talk about potential steals in leagues that you may or may not be going broke playing in. So, Arif, are there any steals that you should look for this week?
Well, as an update for full transparency in terms of whether or not I can give you DFS advice, and again, nothing in this podcast should be considered as gambling advice. I think that I actually tripled my money in the first week, but that makes a lot of sense because DraftKings, FanDuel, Own the Play, DraftStars, whatever, they all misprice, and not everybody gets to pick up on whether or not things are being mispriced. They didn't have Tyrod Taylor, for example, as a starter, so they didn't give him starting salary. So I was able to triple my money in the first week, and I lost some money this next week. Of course, I'm still net ahead. I lost, I want to say, like 8% of what I put in. So just for full transparency, I'm still ahead, but I did lose a little bit last week, and some of that has to do with a really poor Monday night play. Some of it has to do with Andrew Luck. He throws a lot, but whatever.
A lot of situations where you just had no hustle.
I didn't coach him up right. You didn't coach him up.
You didn't coach him up. You didn't have discipline.
But I think in terms of steals that I see in this coming week, I think you can take a look at either some good matchups or players that I think continue to be mispriced. I think you can take a look. So from quarterbacks, I think you could take a look at Nick Foles, who, again, I'm not a huge fan of as a quarterback, but I think that because they're going to be behind a lot, some of that has to do with the fact that Pittsburgh does have a very bad defense. Some of that, I think, is just you can expect a little bit over 30 attempts from Nick Foles in a game. Depending on the league, in FanDuel, it's less important, but in DraftKings, you do have to be cognizant of maybe picking a quarterback that is not going to get 300 yards at least in terms of passing yards, because there's a bonus, a 3-point bonus, a huge bonus, actually, for that. So you want to be wary of that. Foles threw for 297 yards in week 1 against Seattle. That's kind of significant. And only 150 yards against Washington, which also is significant. In the opposite direction. I don't think that he's going to be as effective against Pittsburgh as he was against Seattle, but I think he's going to be more effective than he was against Washington. And so that's something I'd watch out for. I think he's going to throw the ball a little bit more often than usual because they'll be playing from behind. And I think that because interceptions, and he hasn't thrown an interception this year, and he actually wasn't all that interception prone in Philadelphia, still a little bit more than average. But I think that if you're worried about interceptions, they don't matter as much in fantasy as they do in real life, so I wouldn't be that worried about it. And then Cam Newton's another person I'd watch out for. Again, he has terrible receivers, but he's up against the New Orleans defense, which is something, I pay attention to because they're such a bad defense. I think this could be Cam Newton's first game for the over 300 yards passing. Despite that problem, I think that because New Orleans is either starting an undrafted free agent or a fifth-round pick at cornerback, you could probably see, whoever that is getting picked on a lot. And I think that, he's going to rush again for quite a few yards. I think in the last couple of games he's had 111 yards rushing. I think we'll probably see another 50-yard rushing game from him again because I think New Orleans is probably going to, throw open some lanes for him, and there's always the possibility for a touchdown. So I think that's who I'd look at from a quarterback perspective. From a running back perspective, because there's PPR in both leagues, half for FanDuel and one for DraftKings, I take a look at Darren Sproles. He only got 4 targets in the last game against Dallas, but he got 9 in the game against Atlanta. I think we're going to see a little bit more against the New York Jets because of how staunch that run defense is. I think we're not going to see that many runs up the middle. Philadelphia has a bunch of guard problems at either guard position. So I think we're not going to see runs up the middle, which when they had a problem with that, they went to Darren Sproles to run to the outside and also catch to the outside. These leagues also reward, punt return and kick return touchdowns, and, he's a punt returner, so there's always that possibility. But I think the matchup is a good reason to pick him because he's going to get a lot of those screen passes in order to tamp down on the pressure that strong Jets defensive line is going to get. Other than that, I always like Bishop Sankey. He's kind of undervalued still. And I think he's probably a lock to get at least 60 yards in this game against Indianapolis, who's not a very good rushing defense. He does need to catch the ball a little bit more for him to be a super steal. And then I think Amir Abdullah, I'd pick him just because he's getting undervalued because of how terrible his game against Detroit was. But against Denver, their passing defense is so good that I think that they'll want to stick to running up the middle, kind of the opposite of what's happening with the Jets. I think they're going to want to run the ball a little bit more because they're not as good against the run, at least so far this year. That could change, obviously, but I think, that's somebody I'd look at. Tight ends, I'd take a look at Kyle Rudolph. He had 7 targets in the last 2 games. Against San Diego, they have a lot of problems, I think, in the middle of the field. And so I would probably take a look at that. Obviously, he's a red zone target, so he's always a chance to get a touchdown. He's not going to get a bunch of receiving yards, but he's going to get a bunch of receptions, and that's kind of cool, too. I almost always pick Gronkowski in my fantasy leagues or Jason Witten, who's going to be a good play again this year, too, or this week, too. But those aren't really values, so if you're looking to save money at tight end and you don't want to pick Gronkowski, which is not something I advise against, I'd pick Kyle Rudolph because he gets a high number of receptions, even if he doesn't get that many yards. And against the Chargers, there's going to be a little bit more of an opportunity, especially because their cornerbacks are so good that I wouldn't want to throw to the wide receivers as much. And we can talk next week or not next week, to tomorrow or the day after to our guest to talk a little bit more about that. Marcus Wheaton, he's had over 50 yards in the past 2 games. This last game, it was kind of a fluke because it was only on 2 receptions. But with Martavis Bryant out, I think he's still going to be a target to look for. A lot of people overbought him in week 1, and his price has dropped because a bunch of people didn't buy him in week 2. So week 3, his price has dropped, I think, to $3,700 in DraftKings, a little bit more in FanDuel. And I think he's probably going to get a couple of receptions, a lot of yards, and he's always got touchdown potential. So those are the players that I'm going to try to find value on. Again, Julio Jones, Antonio Brown, they're almost always must-plays, so you want to pair, some of these players with players that are going to produce. But those are the players I'd take a look at because I think that in terms of the return that you're going to get on their salary, you should be pretty happy.
And speaking of the Chargers game, I believe we have tickets for it. So if the Chargers win and the Vikings have a terrible game, I suppose you know who to blame.
Yeah, James for buying the tickets.
Exactly. Damn shame. All right, so I think that is everything for this episode of Norse Code. Also, Ragnargazi. Just wanted to say it one more time.
Ragnargazi. Babatunde.
Ragnargazi with a side of Babatunde. So that is going to be it for Norse Code episode 85. Again, thank you for listening. We encourage you to subscribe on iTunes if you are looking to get the show before anybody else. iTunes is the first place that it will appear. So just go ahead and subscribe. It'll be there right when you wake up, just ready to go. Subscribe to us on iTunes. We're also available on Stitcher as well. According to our little sheet that says where everybody's downloading it from, there's many ways you can access the Norse Code podcast, and we encourage you to. We also are putting it up on Reddit and the Daily Norseman page as well, and NorseCodePodcast.com. Again, we are looking to be doing 2 of these a week. As a result, server space is a little bit at a premium. Storage space is a little bit of a premium. So if you wouldn't mind, please just tree fitty to help us out, just to keep the lights on. We are trying to do our best to improve the show for you. Please feel free to comment on any number of pages that'll list our information. We will be happy to respond and happy to look at your suggestions. We hope the audio quality was sufficient and worked out well for you. I think this is a step in the right direction, and we're just working on getting Dusty and Arif there as well. So that'll be cool. Arif, do you have anything to plug?
Nope, and I haven't written anything for a while, so I apologize to people.
You're too busy. You're too busy because your life is now officially sponsored by DraftKings.com. How did they buy the rights to that? Is that how you can afford to live and not write? Is that what?
I didn't even know that they had bought it. So hopefully I'll see that money soon.
Is that what Kyle did? Is that how he ends up just living? Like
being a DraftKings, I wouldn't be surprised if he was a shill.
Does he have a DraftKings tattoo on his face? Like I don't know these things. I feel
that makes sense to me too. That's something that I could see happening.
He actually has a contract where his next born is just going to be. He has to actually name it DraftKinga or something like that.
DraftKinga or DraftKing, depending on the gender.
It used to be Golden Palace, but now it's DraftKings.com. We're taking over kids' names too. So, if you'd like to follow us on Twitter, you are more than welcome to do so. You can do so to myself. I'm at Big Mono. I also man the Norse Code DN Twitter account. I try to make that both educational, interesting, and or hilarious on game day. Also, Dusty O'Connell is at Dusty O'Connell, and Arif is at Arif Hassan NFL, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
That is correct. Fantastic. You can also email us at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com, or just send something to the Twitter account, or post on the Daily Norseman website. We'd be happy to talk to you about it. So, for Arif, for Dusty, and for myself, thank you so much for listening, and our formula is this. Keep Teddy alive. We will see you in just a couple days with our Chargers preview.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.
Welcome back to the show. You thought we forgot about it. Welcome to the analysis portion of the show, featuring myself and the Norse Code Fantasy Football team. The league. The Fantasy Football League. So, let's talk about it, and let's bring up the news for the team Can You Dig It?, which was our victim this week, as they started Dan Carpenter, who missed an extra point. As a result of this miss, they ended up losing their game. Ouch. Let's go to the listing and see what we had. This was not a great week, unless your name was Arif Hassan. Arif is now in first place by a considerable margin, with both the most wins and the most points. Let's take a look at the scores. The Ghost of Al Davis, my team, ends up moving right into the cellar, scoring only 65 points this week against #probably Sean Prater. Manuel's team ends up going into second place, starting off 2-0 with, oh yes, barely defeating the team of Carlos's crazy team, who as we've have discussed, is the team for Kyle. 100.28 to 99.5. Ouch. Next up, Matt Frazier's team won 102.8 to 99.86 against TBA, which is still the worst name in the league. Arif won his game against Dusty quite handedly, 101.44 to 77 points. Can You Dig It lost his game to the $1 Million Shack as a result of a shanked extra point. He lost 97 to 108.72. Final game of the league involved the Minnesota Midgets, who are now 1-1, winning against the Blunt Force Trauma 107.12 versus 104.26. So here are your standings. We have Jeffrey and Hyde, OES, Matt Frazier's team, Blunt Force Trauma, Carlos's crazy team, TBA, $1 Million Shack, hashtag probably Sean Prater, Minnesota Midgets, Can You Dig It, Balgazi Green Ellis, and the Ghost of Al Davis heading up the rear. What you should look for next week. I'm glad you asked. The Ghost of Al Davis is going to be playing TBA, hoping to move out of the cellar. Arif is going to be playing Matt Frazier's team, so that's two teams that are both 2-0. Arif is the person who is at number 1 right now with the most points, despite the fact that he started Le'Veon Bell the first week. He just wanted to point that out, just because it's embarrassing to the rest of us. Also of note, Dusty's Balgazi Green Ellis is facing Can You Dig It in a matchup of two 0-2 teams. One of them will be forced to victory. That's it for Norse Code. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe to us on iTunes. Please find it in your heart to help keep the lights on around here. And once again, please keep Teddy alive.